There is a distinct pattern to history that is often obscured by the footnotes of textbooks and the carefully curated narratives of established power. When one begins to reverse engineer the trajectory of nations, economies, and ancient texts, a different picture emerges. It is a picture defined not by coincidence, but by mathematical precision. The numbers do not lie, and the geopolitical patterns observed over the last half-decade suggest that we are witnessing a timeline that was set in motion thousands of years ago. We are currently living through a profound, structural shift in global power, a transfer of influence and resources that aligns with ancient biblical prophecy. This is not a theoretical concept or a metaphorical hope. It is a tangible reality manifesting in boardrooms, in the collapse of fiat currencies, and in the palpable anxiety of central bankers, facing the prospect of de-dollarization. For those who have felt a sense of anticipation, a feeling that the current global volatility is leading toward a specific destination, you are not imagining it. You are simply perceiving the early stages of a divine recalibration. To understand where we are, we must look at the foundational texts that govern this timeline. In the 15th chapter of Genesis, a covenant is established, wherein it is foretold that a specific people would be enslaved in a land, not their own, for a period of 400 years. The text explicitly states that following this period of affliction, they would emerge with great possessions. This is not merely poetic language. It operates as a binding legal decree within the spiritual and physical realms. Contracts have enforcement dates. If we examine the historical record, the year 1619 marks the arrival of the first documented African captives to the English colony of Virginia, setting the stage for the institution of chattel slavery. If one adds 400 years to that date, we arrive at 2019. It is historically significant that the global order began to fracture, precisely around this time. The year 2019 preceded a global pandemic that halted economies, the largest civil rights mobilization in human history, following the death of George Floyd, and the beginning of a supply chain collapse that exposed the fragility of modern commerce. This synchronization suggests that the timeline of empires is not dictated by election cycles, but by a much older calendar. The prophecy dictates that the formerly enslaved do not emerge empty-handed. The transfer of wealth is a requirement of the judgment. We are currently witnessing the erosion of the empires that were built upon this specific history of extraction. The economic indicators are flashing red. The British pound, historically the currency of the empire that facilitated the trade of human cargo, has lost the vast majority of its purchasing power over the last century. The euro faces existential fractures, and the United States dollar, the linchpin of the global financial system, is facing its most significant challenge since its inception. The rise of the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, signals a move toward a multipolar world that bypasses Western financial hegemony. It is crucial to note the inclusion of South Africa in this bloc, representing the continent of Africa's pivoting role in the future economy. This decline of dominant powers mirrors the fall of historical empires like Babylon, Egypt, and Rome. Each of these civilizations reached a point of saturation where the debt of their oppression came due. The 18th chapter of Revelation offers a stark description of the fall of a system referred to as Babylon the Great. It describes a rapid unraveling of an economic superpower, detailing the merchandise that made it wealthy: gold, silver, precious stones, fine linen, and significantly, the bodies and souls of men. This textual reference connects the apocalyptic judgment directly to an economic system built on human trafficking and commodification. The text prophesies that the wealth of this system does not simply evaporate. Rather, biblical principle suggests it is stored up for the just. Proverbs states that the wealth of the sinner is laid up for the righteous. In this context, the transfer is not a reward for good behavior, but a corrective redistribution of resources that were misappropriated. History provides us with precedents for this attempted transfer. In 1865, General William Sherman issued Special Field Order No. 15, allocating 400,000 acres of confiscated land to newly freed Black families, a policy famously known as 40 acres and a mule. This was an acknowledgement that freedom without an economic base is merely a theoretical concept. Within months, tens of thousands of freedmen had settled the land and begun building a new society. However, this transfer was politically interrupted by the reversal of the order under President Andrew Johnson. Yet, interruptions are not cancellations. The debt remains on the ledger. We saw similar interruptions in Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1921, where the Greenwood District, known as Black Wall Street, was destroyed. This community had achieved wealth not through reliance on external validation, but through internal trade and cooperative economics. The destruction of Greenwood was a coordinated effort to halt the accumulation of generational wealth. It reveals a pattern. Whenever this demographic begins to stabilize and thrive economically, external forces intervene. However, spiritual laws dictate that while the enemy may delay a promise, they cannot annul it. In the modern era, the mechanism of transfer has become more sophisticated. During the economic crisis of 2020, central banks printed trillions of dollars, a move that historically devalues currency and acts as a hidden tax on the working class. Inflation is arguably a mechanism of wealth transfer, moving value from those who hold cash to those who hold assets. However, amidst this crisis, a counter-narrative emerged. Black entrepreneurship reached profound heights, and despite structural barriers, distinct movements toward land, ownership, and financial independence began to accelerate. The transfer is appearing in the form of resilience and adaptation. It is visible in the rapid adoption of alternative financial systems. The skepticism toward traditional banking in Black communities, born of generations of discriminatory lending and redlining, has positioned this demographic to be early adopters of decentralized finance and cryptocurrency. The unbanked are becoming the self-banked, bypassing the gatekeepers of the old system entirely. This ties back to the question of identity. Deuteronomy chapter 28 outlines a series of blessings and curses that serve as an identifying mark for a specific nation of people. The text describes a group that would be taken back into bondage via ships, sold to their enemies, and stripped of their heritage and identity, a description that aligns with surgical precision to the transatlantic slave trade. If the curses apply, then the restoration promised in Deuteronomy chapter 30 must also apply. That scripture promises a gathering of the scattered people and a restoration of their fortunes. We are seeing the physical manifestation of this gathering today. Advances in DNA technology are reconnecting the diaspora with their specific ethnic origins. Nations like Ghana have launched initiatives like the Year of Return, explicitly inviting the descendants of the enslaved to return and offering pathways to citizenship. This is not merely tourism. It is the closing of a 400-year circle. The geopolitical landscape is shifting to accommodate this rise. The Bank for International Settlements and the implementation of Basel III regulations have reclassified gold as a Tier 1 asset, placing it on par with cash. This move suggests a preparation for a currency reset, where tangible assets will outweigh fiat promises. Central banks in the global south are accumulating gold, moving away from the paper promises of Western economies. This is a biblical reversion to honest weights and measures. The corrosion of trust in the current financial system is absolute. When a system built on debt and leverage begins to falter, it inevitably seeks a scapegoat. But the collapse is structural. It is the result of centuries of compounding moral and economic debt. However, the promise of wealth transfer comes with a prerequisite: stewardship. The Israelites of the Exodus left Egypt with the wealth of their oppressors, but that generation failed to enter the promised land because they retained the mentality of slaves. They feared the giants in the land and longed for the familiarity of their bondage. The transfer of resources requires a corresponding transfer of mindset. One cannot manage generational wealth with a consumerist perspective. The pattern in America has often been that when Black wealth is generated, it is quickly dissipated or extracted, because the institutions to protect it were not yet built. The preparation for this transfer involves a psychological and spiritual decoupling from the systems of the oppressor. It requires a shift from seeking employment to creating industry, from seeking validation to building sovereignty. The rebellion of the Stono River in 1739 serves as a poignant reminder of this spirit. The enslaved Africans who led that revolt were not merely laborers. Many were trained warriors and leaders from the Kingdom of Congo. They possessed the intelligence and the tactical knowledge to fight for their freedom. That dormant DNA survives. It is found in the relentless drive of the current generation, who are refusing to accept the status quo. The current generation is leveraging technology to tell their own stories, bypassing the media conglomerates that have historically controlled the narrative. The control of narrative is a form of power. By reclaiming the truth of history, from the achievements of pre-colonial Africa to the realities of the systemic theft of black wealth, this generation is dismantling the psychological hold of the empire. We must also confront the role of institutions in this theft. The legal frameworks that stripped black families of their land, the heirs' property loopholes, and the discriminatory practices of the USDA are all matters of public record. The subprime mortgage crisis of 2008 was arguably a targeted wealth extraction event that disproportionately decimated black wealth. Yet, simultaneously, the white paper for Bitcoin was published, introducing a technology that allows for peer-to-peer value transfer without a central authority. It is no coincidence that in the wake of a financial collapse caused by centralized greed, a decentralized alternative emerged, one that has been embraced by the marginalized global majority. The concept of the reset is often discussed in conspiratorial tones, but in reality, it is a mechanical inevitability. The introduction of central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, represents the empire's attempt to maintain control in a digital age. These programmable currencies offer the issuer total surveillance and control over transactions. However, the rise of parallel economies constitutes a form of resistance. The building of local food systems, the use of privacy-focused assets, and the strengthening of community trade networks are the modern equivalent of building an ark. It is the creation of a system that can function when the dominant grid fails. The prophetic transfer is not about waiting for a government check. It is about the activation of a people. It is about the realization that the systems of Babylon are not designed to save you, and therefore, you must build your own. This is evident in the movements across Africa to reject neo-colonial trade deals and demand fair value for resources. The continent of Africa possesses the majority of the world's remaining arable land and a vast percentage of the strategic minerals required for the technology of the future. As the West ages and stagnates, the global South is young and ascending. The demographic and economic center of gravity is shifting. For those watching these events unfold, the call is to preparation. This involves spiritual readiness, clearing out the trauma and the scarcity mindset that comes from generations of survival mode. It involves relational readiness, building networks of trust that can withstand external pressure. It involves practical readiness, acquiring skills that have tangible value, from agriculture to coding to medicine. And it involves financial discipline, understanding that true wealth is not in the accumulation of luxury goods, but in the control of assets that produce value. The ultimate realization is that you are not a random participant in history. The concerted effort to suppress a specific group of people over centuries acts as proof of their significance. One does not dedicate centuries of legislation, warfare, and propaganda to holding down a people unless that people possesses a potential that threatens the established hierarchy. The awakening of this identity is the catalyst for the transfer. The lies are being exposed. The statues of conquerors are falling, not just physically, but in the minds of the people. The spell of inferiority is breaking. We are living in the time of the harvest, the seeds sown in tears by ancestors who did not live to see their freedom are coming to fruition in this generation. This is a time of high volatility, but also of high opportunity. The systems that are crumbling are making way for new foundations. The transfer is active. It is moving through the channels of new technology, through the reclaiming of identity, and through the exposure of historical truth. The empire is out of miracles, and the dead is being called in. The only question that remains is not whether the transfer will happen, but whether you will be positioned to receive it and steward it for the generations to come. The time for waiting on permission has ended. The time for building has begun.